Shane Arden.
Mr Chairman, it's always a privilege and a pleasure to follow along from the member from West Coast Tasman. But I need to back up a little bit and just recap, I guess, some of the comments made by some of his colleagues prior to that. The speaker that spoke just immediately prior on the other side to the Honourable Damien O'Connor can be excused for being very young and very ignorant on this matter, but he overwhelmingly demonstrated, I guess, the philosophical divide between those over there and those on this side of the House. At least the Honourable Damien O'Connor tried to bring something credible to the argument, but the member over there that's interjecting also demonstrates the philosophical divide, and that is that there is a belief that there are a group of farmers in the high country that are rich, that are privileged and are not deserving of recognition by the state, no recognition by the state for the 6 million merinos they farm and the hundreds of millions of dollars worth of export earnings that they produce for New Zealand. Well, there you go. The member over there says it's public land. Let's test that. Let's just test that for a moment. That government, when they were in power, the Labor government, with that member in as a minister, paid well and truly over the odds for the Birchwood and St James stations, and actually set the precedent, said that the value of the lease was worth nothing. Effectively, or the value of the lease was worth millions, but the value of the freehold part of it, the state part of it, was worth nothing. Because if the value that the state had was as high as that member would have us believe now, why did they pay so much to get them? Why did you pay? Why did the Labor Party pay so much to secure land it already owned? Why did it pay so much to secure land it already owned? So let's just put that to one side for a moment. One moment. Just park that for a moment. The Honourable Damien O'Connor made some interesting points. The only member so far to make a reasonable contribution on that side. He made some interesting points, and the points are this: what is the value of the unimproved value? What is the value of the unimproved value? How do you set a fair and equitable lease for those that, how does the government set a fair and equitable lease for those that are farming this land? And the reality is, the only way you can, or the government can, set those leases is that it must be bankable. It must bring certainty. Just look at the track record of the previous government. 113 leases are currently before the Land Value Tribunal. What does that say? What would you read from that? Would you suggest that that's brought about certainty, it's brought about security of tenure, it's brought about protection of the high country, it's brought about protection of the iconic values? No, what that suggests, Mr Speaker, Mr Chairman, is that the current situation was unsustainable. Untenable. And something had to happen, simply untenable, that's for sure. And so the Honourable Damien O'Connor would have a point if the land were ever going to be sold. Both major parties in the House have said that they have no intention of selling Department of Conservation or state-owned land at this point, particularly high country and iconic. All they want to do on both sides of the Parliament, apparently, but clearly not evident from the exercise that we've been through with the previous government, all they're wanting to do is secure a viable and long-term secure proposition for those that farm this land. And let's just have a look at those people. They are not this rich group of vandals as described by previous speakers. They are hard-working people, often living in very isolated areas, often substantial contributors to their wider community, generally speaking very, very honest, upstanding citizens. And to listen to the Labor Party on the other side, and those that have spoken in this debate, they would be the biggest villains that the country has ever seen. I just wish that some of them would actually travel to some of these stations occasionally, and have a look at what is involved and what is involved in running these high country stations. I would also wish that they'd actually back up their rhetoric with some facts. And so far, what we've seen is none of that. What we've seen is some kind of imaginary comparison with state houses. Well, state houses are bought and sold by successive governments, both Labor and National, all the time. there is clearly a market value. There is clearly a house on the street next door that is for sale of a similar type of... Mr Speaker, Mr Chairman, there's clearly a house on the other side of the street that has a market value that you can set the value by. There is clearly a true market. Try and explain to me, if you will, what the true market of the high country leases are. And to suggest that these farmers should pay some amenity value because they have a iconic hillside that looks over Lake Wanaka or some other such, the Remarkables, and their sheep will somehow grow more wool because it is primarily wool that they produce, and that somehow would turn a higher return because of its location, is about as labourish as it's possible to be and socialist as it's possible to be. And I suggest to you, Mr Speaker, that they need to take a good look at themselves. There is no true market. Unimproved value will become more and more difficult to establish as time goes on. You cannot put a peg in the ground and say this is the true value. There is no market. In fact, the only market that we've got to measure by, Mr Speaker, Mr Chairman, is the market that the Labor Party itself entered into with the purchase of Birchwood and the purchase of St James, and clearly they put such a high value on the lease and no value at all on the land, zero value, because they paid 5 and 6 times above what the per stock unit value of a normal or comparative farming operation would be to secure those properties, that they themselves devalued what the Crown's share was in this high country. So I suspect, Mr Speaker, as this bill passes through the Parliament, there will be all this hot air from a group of people that are totally ignorant of the circumstances that we face here. And, Mr Speaker, I look forward to the passage of the bill. Thank you.
Eugenie Sage.
Thank you, Mr Chairman.